On today's Locked On Jayhawks, we start to preview the KU basketball season. We're going to dive deep into the guards and wings specifically.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Jayhawks. I'm Derek Johnson. You can hear me as well on Rock Chalk Sports Talk from 3 to 6 on KLWN in Lawrence from Monday through Friday. Thanks for making Locked On Jayhawks your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And on today's edition of Locked On Jayhawks, obviously no football game to recap with KU having a bye week. It is the first week of KU basketball, sort of exhibition game against Pitt State on Thursday. Obviously, we'll do a little look ahead later in the show to the KU Oklahoma State game on the football field, and we'll spend plenty more time on that over the course of the week. But we're going to start diving into some of the position previews. We're going to do a guards and wing preview today. We're going to have our big man preview coming up later in the week here. And I guess the first thing that sticks out when you look at the guards and wings, how is this team going to play for Kansas in the 2022 to 23 season? Obviously, last year it was mostly wing oriented. KU brought in Remy Martin as a transfer, and with the way that Dwan Harris was earning trust and ended up being a starter for really the full part of the season and whatnot for KU, you figured that when all was said and done, Remy Martin and Dwan Harris were going to be a starting backcourt together. But that didn't end up being the case. Sure, you saw lineups where both were on there, and at the end of the season, we saw that happen for a good chunk of time during the NCAA tournament. But over the long haul, and for the most of what KU did last season, it was one guard, either Dwan Harris or Remy Martin, and three wings, and then a big man with usually David McCormick or Mitch Lightfoot in there. And we've seen kind of the gradual progression of Bill Self as a coach, where you look at him in his early years at Kansas, he's playing two bigs next to each other. And then you have kind of the evolution of him playing four out, but him playing kind of two lead guards with like Frank Mason next to Devontae Graham, or on and on down the list of lead guards that have been next to each other for KU. And he's always just kind of adjusted to whatever is best for that specific team with that version of personnel, or where the college game is going, or where he can find success, where you bring in recruits. And last year, it was obviously wing-oriented when your two best players were Ochai Agbaji and Christian Brown, and you also had Jalen Wilson on the team that you're going to play a lot of those wings all next to each other. And this year, it's going to be kind of similar. Like the best players on KU this season, the best position is their wing position. You could argue that KU has the best wing position in the entire country because you have Jalen Wilson, who's a Big 12 Player of the Year, All-American candidate. Kevin McCullough is going to be an All-Big 12 candidate this season. And then you bring in your two McDonald's All-American wings with Grady Dick, who sounds like he's going to be able to hit the ground running, and MJ Rice, who so far it sounds like, might be taking him a little bit longer, but the potential is still really, really high for a guy like MJ Rice. And then you have KJ Adams, too, who we saw more so as a small ball five last season, but he's kind of a 3-4-5 man hybrid and can be an elite defender and do a lot of small things for you. So you are loaded at the wing position. Now, if we're lumping this together with the guards as well, you add in how they want to play. I think we look to the fact that you have all that personnel and say, okay, they're mostly going to play three wings, which means we're not going to see a ton of, doesn't mean we won't see any of it, of the two lead guard lineups that we've seen for a lot of other seasons with Bill Self at the helm. And I do think we will see it for certain chunks. Dwan Harris is going to be a rock out there, whether it's Bobby Pettiford or Joe Yesufu. Sounds like Yesufu's more of the off-ball guy. Who knows, maybe even a guy like Kyle Cuff. We're going to see a chunk of time, I think, devoted, especially in the early going and part of the rotation, that maybe you do play 5, 10, 15 minutes a game with those two guards next to each other. But I think the overwhelming majority of what KU is going to play, you're going to see one lead guard with three wings on the court. Again, you'll see a little bit of both, but the majority will feature kind of the latter there with what KU wants to do. And there's certainly interesting positions because you look at the lead guard spot, Dwan Harris going to gobble up a bunch of those and a majority of those positions. So it's trying to figure out who's going to be the backup point guard. Sounds like Bobby Pettiford has the edge there, but who knows? Maybe Joe Yesufu or Kyle Cuff could work into that. Again, mentioned Yesufu might be more of a kind of off ball there. Then you look at the wing possession, like Jalen Wilson is going to play a ton of minutes for this team. Is he going to mostly play at the 4, which we saw from him last year and the year before mostly saw him as kind of a 4 and even at times a 5? Or could we see him at certain times even being a 3 and having like KJ Adams at the 4 for this team? Because when you think about Jalen Wilson in the pros, he might have to be a 3-man depending on what happens there. Obviously, KU, you do owe it to your players to try to maximize their potential and try to get them into the NBA. But Bill Self isn't going into every game saying, hey, well, I'm just, performing this or doing this in the game plan or scouting, X's and O's, whatever, just to get this guy drafted. No, he's trying to win games and trying to bring a title to KU. And then you have Kevin McCullough, who's kind of a mix between he can be like a backup point guard or he can be a wing. Like with Grady Dick, is he more of a 2? Is he more of a guy who can play the 4 with his size? Same with MJ Rice. Like he's 6'5", but he's built like a linebacker. Could he play the 4? So you have a lot of guys that can fit into different positions, and that's the beauty of playing with all the different wings. It gives you flexibility, gives you a bunch of different options with guarding, with switching on the defensive end, and it gives you a lot of opportunity to get out in the open court and transition because you have a bunch of guys on the floor all at once who have the ability to grab and go, to grab a rebound and start the break, whether that's them leading the break and passing to someone else, whether it's them leading the break and scoring. Whatever it is, it just gives you a lot of options. And I think Bill Self enjoyed that last season. And we're going to see kind of a continuation of that a little bit this season. But as far as the position groups go, since we basically narrowed this into the guards / wings versus the big men, which we'll do later this week, this is certainly the position that you feel more comfortable about, that you feel like you know a little bit more about, even though there still are certain questions about who's going to fit in where, how many minutes are they going to play, could a guy like MJ Rice or maybe a second guard like Bobby Pettiford or Joe Yesufu work into a bigger role, maybe even a starting role later in the season? Like all those are valid questions and whatnot, but you have more confidence, I think, right now and more knowns than maybe you do at the big man spot for this specific position at this point in time at the beginning of the year for KU. I want to get into some superlatives with this position group coming up, the best new X factor, biggest surprise, some questions like that. We're also going to do a quick look ahead to the Oklahoma State football game for KU this Saturday. BetOnline.net is your number one source for football and the start of the new basketball season. Find all of the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth analysis on every game. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all your sports wagering information with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. The fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite games and events, including MLB, MMA, boxing, college football, college basketball, and golf. You can head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more, and you can get in on the action before the season starts. They have, pregame futures on KU to win the title if you think they can go back-to-back. You can get in on the college football action today as KU only projected to be a one-score underdog against Oklahoma State this week. So plenty to bet on from the KU side, obviously. I don't know if they'll have a lineup for Pitt State, but they'll certainly will for the season opener, the regular season opener, I should say, in another week. Bet online where the game starts. So I want to do some of these superlatives for the KU guard and wing position. And let's start with the best. Who is the best of the bunch? It has to be Jalen Wilson. He's your returning guy from last year who this is technically his 4th year in school. And how often have we seen Bill Self players go from year 3 to year 4? I mean, it's funny because we could actually do this for every year. We could point to, Frank Mason from year 3 to year 4 went from being an all-conference solid player to being the national player of the year. Devontae Graham went from being an all-conference player as a junior to being a first-team All-American as a senior. Like, there's the growth from year 3 to year 4. You could also be like, well, Marcus Morris went from, year 2 to year 3, all of a sudden being a Big 12 player of the year. Thomas Robinson, year 2 to year 3. Like, we can do this with every year because KU's just had so many good players under Bill Self that you're going to be able to find an example no matter what you do. But certainly there are a lot of really good examples for guys heading from year 3 to year 4 and what they've grown as for KU. And Jalen Wilson has already been a really good player. After he redshirted his first year, comes on as a redshirt freshman and really breaks out at the start of that year. And he was looking like KU's best player at the start of the season. And then things got a little bit different. He was playing a lot of small ball 5, which he found advantageous for his game. David McCormick started playing better, so he's playing more 4. And you saw him struggle maybe at certain times, having some inconsistencies his redshirt freshman year, but still overall have a really good season. And then headed into his redshirt sophomore year last year, he has the off-the-court stuff go down, which causes him to miss the first 3 games. And it just seemed like he was – and he talked about this. I forget if it was Jesse Newell or Matt Tate with one of the local papers, the beat writers that wrote about kind of getting into the mind of him, that he was kind of struggling to, get accustomed to coming off the bench and working back into the lineup. And like you had heard over the offseason, he had been one of KU's better players, but because of that off the court suspension, it led to him, starting kind of behind the eight ball and struggling to, you feel like you're a hamster on one of the wheels where it's like the more and more you run, you're not gaining any ground. And finally, once we got to Big 12 play, he was able to kind of reset and be like, it's a brand new season. And over the last 25 games last season, he averaged 13 points, 8 rebounds. He led Kansas in scoring against Providence in the Sweet 16. He led Kansas in scoring in the national championship game against North Carolina. The shooting never really came around for him last season, shot under 30% from three, closer to 25% from the three-point arc. But he was just a grinder. He did a lot of little things for you, got a lot of big rebounds, found ways to grind his way 2 points at different points in time. He was really good in transition for you, and he did have a couple outburst games that stood out. You could make the argument Kevin McCullough maybe could end up being the best of the wings for KU, maybe even Grady Dick, because the potential is super high for a guy like Grady Dick, especially if he's going to be like a 40% three-point shooter. But I don't think there's any doubts coming into the year for me that Jalen Wilson's going to be the go-to guy on this team, that he's going to be a Big 12 Player of the Year candidate, and he is the best of the wings in this discussion. Now, the best new wing, man, MJ Rice is, we just had Jason Jordan on Friday. You can check that out, whether you're watching on YouTube or checking out one of our podcasts. And he really raved about MJ Rice. So that's exciting there. We heard Bill Self, though, talk about that he won't be the same player he is now than when he is in February. So might take him a little bit longer. It wouldn't be surprising if Grady Dick is the best new one. You have all the hype with him coming in as this 5-star freshman and being a guy that can light it up from downtown and from three, something this team really needs. Wouldn't be shocking if he had like a 14, 15 point per game season because of what KU is going to need him to do from the outside. But I think it's going to be Kevin McCullough. He was the best defender last season on the team that finished number 1 in Ken Palm adjusted defensive efficiency a season ago. So the best player on the best defensive team in the country. It's pretty much the succinct way to put it. You could argue he is the best perimeter defender in the entire country this year. Now, the thing for Kevin McCullough, because he's had kind of injuries all of his years in college, trying to stay healthy. That's going to be very key for him and for KU defensively. He's going to impact a lot in the passing game, on the defensive side of the ball, and he's going to be a good transition scorer. And I think KU is going to do a better job than Texas Tech has of manufacturing him open shots, whether it is in the flow of the offense or if it is something drawn up for him. So I'll go with Kevin McCullough, but it obviously wouldn't be surprised if it was Grady Dick. Who is the X factor amongst the guard group? And by the way, I haven't even brought DeJuan Harris up here, which he probably should be in discussion for the best player among the guards and the wings as well. Probably an oversight for me not bringing him up there. Just statistically, it probably won't be there, but in terms of the importance, it probably would be him. So if you're saying most valuable, you could argue DeJuan Harris. He's probably going to have the ball in his hands more than anybody else on this team. And if he is a legit defender that's a nuisance, getting 2 steals per game and getting into the opposing point guard and cutting the head off the snake, so to speak, of the other team, and he's averaging 6, 7, 8 assists per game, and he's able to hit open shots for you, like he's going to be probably the most valuable player on the team. Because think about it like this too. You have all these young players, whether it's the centers, whether it's the wings like Grady Dick and MJ Rice, even newcomers like Kevin McCullough. And you know what a steadying presence and a calming force DeJuan Harris can be for those new guys to kind of get everybody in shape and put them in the right positions? That's going to be huge. The most valuable I'll give to DeJuan Harris. You could argue he'd be the X factor as well. But for me, the X factor here in this discussion is Joe Yesufu. If Joe Yesufu is unable to shoot consistently, with him being more of an off-ball guy this season, KU might just say, we're just going to stick to like the 3-wing lineup a majority of the time, if not all of the time. But if Joe Yesufu is able to come in and do what he did his final 2 or 3 months at Drake before he transferred to KU and be a guy who's averaging, I guess him averaging 20 a game, that probably won't happen this year at KU with all the pieces around you, but being a guy who's shooting efficiently, shooting, 45% from the floor, shooting high 30% from 3-point range. And not just that, hitting tough shots, being able to get tough makes for you when the shot clock's winding down or the game is winding down. If he can do those things, he's going to have a serious role on this team, and they will play 2 of those lead guards next to each other a lot. But if not, you might not see it as much. So he's the biggest X factor, and he can really impact something. Those late game shot making, that's something that maybe you have a bit of a question about with KU. Like, I think Jalen Wilson can do it. You think Grady Dick can do it, but you don't know. He's a freshman. you need guys who can be able to do that. You had a lot of them last year. Christian Brown could do it. Ochai Agbaji could do it. Remy Martin could certainly do it. David McCormick could do it in his own way if you got it to him on the block. Obviously, Jalen Wilson. So you need guys that can do that. For me, Joe Yesufu is the X factor. You could argue MJ Rice, I think, here, because I keep mentioning could be completely different by the time we get to Big 12 play than the start of the season. And that could certainly impact things for KU. Who would be the biggest surprise among the wings? This one is really tough because I'm not sure there's anybody who would be surprising. I guess Bobby Pettiford might be the answer. A guy who at the beginning of last season had some good flashes, including in the season opener against Michigan State, but had to deal with injuries throughout the season. He never made a three over the course of the year. And once he got tossed back in after the injury, it was clear he wasn't still 100%. And he got tossed into some tough situations. I think his first game back was against Iowa State in Allen Fieldhouse. And Iowa State was a great defensive team that would just pressure the heck out of the ball. And that caused him some issues. And I think Bill Self said after the game, like, it was kind of unfair to him to put him into the game, but we wanted to try to get him some time and kind of test him out and whatnot. I think he could have a really good breakout season where he's your backup point guard for DeJuan Harris. Maybe they play next to each other a little bit, play some off ball a little bit, plays, 12, 15, maybe even 20 minutes per game if it's all working out. And I think that he is very similar to a lot of great KU guards in a certain facet, which is his ability to, this was something that Frank Mason did really, really well. When he got you on his side, when he got you on his hip, or even slightly behind you, it was over. Because he was able to keep you there, even though he was fast, he was quick, he was strong for a guard, but he wasn't the fastest guy. He wasn't the quickest guy. He wasn't the strongest guy. He was able to keep you on his hip with angles and with, just the tenacity, whatever it was, just understanding the game. And that's something you see in Bobby Pettiford. When he gets you on your hip or your side, like, he's able to get to the rim. And that's something that's been really, I guess, profitable for KU guards under Bill Self in the past. Now, the widest range of outcomes among the guards and the wings, I think for me, it has to be MJ Rice. You can convince me that it all clicks for him. A guy who has all the athleticism in the world, a guy who can be a streaky shooter and can hit tough buckets for you. Those are things that could be helpful for Kansas this season. And if it all works, you could convince me MJ Rice is playing 25, 30 minutes per game. That he's this big switchable wing that's athletic. He's a terror in transition. He gets you some tough buckets. He plays good defense. You could also convince me that, if you have 120 minutes to give out between the 2, 3, and 4 positions, if 30 something goes to Jalen, 30 something goes to McCullough, 30 goes to Grady Dick, now you're looking at only 25 to 30 minutes being available for everybody else with KJ Adams, MJ Rice, and playing a off guard with either Bobby Pettiford or Joe Yesufu. So in that situation, if MJ Rice doesn't see the season click for him and you have all these other guys playing a lot of minutes, maybe he is only playing 15 minutes a game and he struggles shooting the ball. And he is someone that you feel like is still going to have an excellent career in his time in college basketball and at Kansas, and eventually is going to be a pro, but maybe that just doesn't hit right away. So I think there is a big wide range of outcomes for maybe MJ Rice this season. All right, in just a minute, we are going to take a look and switch gears over to the football side at the Oklahoma State game this Saturday in Lawrence. Keep it locked on right here on Locked On Jayhawks. And if you're on YouTube, you can subscribe. Make sure to like all of our videos. If you could, feel free to comment. And if you have any questions, you can hit us up on YouTube. You can hit me up at D Johnson Radio as well. KU takes on Oklahoma State on the football field on Saturday. 2:30 kick. It was a late announcement for the kickoff time. And obviously you can hear it on KLWN in Lawrence. This is going to be a very interesting game. You have the quarterback injury question for both teams, right? Is Jalen Daniels the week he's going to come back? We had Pete Thamel, the report a couple weeks ago, saying that was the target date, but you don't know how things worked off the bye and if Jalen's actually going to start this week. If he doesn't, Jason Bean's been good, but there is a little bit difference in the processing between the two. Now, what about Oklahoma State? They have their own quarterback questions or worries with injury. You look at Spencer Sanders, who has been really good this season. He had some turnover issues his past couple of years, but overall he was a dynamic player. This year, he would just seem to be taking even the next step, but kind of dealing with injuries all throughout the season, banged up, playing through some stuff. And then against Kansas State, he has an injury that takes him out of the game. And I don't know if it was just something where Oklahoma State said, we're not going to worry about trying to push him back into the game because we're losing by so much to Kansas State, or if it was a combo of both, or if it was just the injuries that bad, if it's going to keep him out this week. I'm not sure what the deal is there. If he can't go, the backup QB for Oklahoma State looked a little spooked in that game against the Wildcats. And you see the betting line that came out early in this one. I thought it was going to be around like 10 points, even after they lost by 48, because I thought before the K-State game, I thought the line was going to be somewhere between maybe 10 at the low end, maybe like 13, 14 points. And then after they got blown out, I figured it'd be somewhere around 6 to 8 points, somewhere in that range. It opened up around 3, which may be indicative of what, I don't know, Vegas thinks is going to happen with Spencer Sanders maybe not being able to play in this game, and how that could really, so I mean, you could have a huge boost for Kansas. Jalen Daniels plays and Spencer Sanders does not, or if Spencer Sanders plays and Jason Bean plays for Kansas instead of Jalen Daniels. I do think that Sanders playing versus Bean is closer than if Daniels plays versus Sanders not. Like, there's a wider gap there. That would be in a positive way for KU, because Bean, I think, is a better backup than what Oklahoma State has. So that'll be kind of the key question all week long. But you look at Oklahoma State, they're a team that has put up a lot of points this year. They had a dominant defense last season in the Big 12, but they lost so many players. They had a bunch of guys who were 4th, 5th, 6th-year seniors on that defense, and they lost a bunch to graduation and to the NFL and whatnot. Like, you see Malcolm Rodriguez and some others having success in the NFL, and they just have kind of struggled on that end this season. You give up, I forget what it was in regulation, but through overtime, 43 to TCU. You give up 48 to Kansas State. You give up 34, and you get down early to Texas. Kansas is going to have an opportunity to score in this game. And yes, the Oklahoma State game has been a little bit like the Baylor series of late, where they've kind of dominated, but there have actually been more games in there that have been maybe a little bit closer than you would think. There was a game a handful of years ago where I think it was tied, and Tyreek Hill had like a kickoff return touchdown, and they ended up beating Kansas by 7 or 10 points. So there has been some close-ish games in this series, and who knows, maybe Vegas is saying this is one of KU's most winnable games remaining, and after the way they lost to Kansas State, I don't know which way that makes you feel. I don't know if that makes you feel like, oh, great, now they're going to be pissed off, now they're going to be upset, now they're going to be playing extra angry because they're trying to bounce back from last week, or if that tells you that this team has serious problems and that Kansas should be able to exploit some things that Kansas State did. You can look at it one way or the other. That's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Jayhawks. Coming up tomorrow, we're going to be joined by Nick Schwerdt, and we're going to talk some more KU basketball. We're actually going to do some KU basketball season props, so that should be a fun one. If you have anything you'd like for the show to talk about or want to follow along on the action, you can reach out at DJohnsonRadio on Twitter. You can comment here on the YouTube page. Don't forget to subscribe to the show, whether it's on YouTube or anywhere that you get your podcasts with Locked On Jayhawks. That'll do it for today's episode. Have a good rest of your day. I'll see some of you on Rock Chalk Sports Talk later today.